is whether a hospital, a Catholic affiliated hospital, or just any hospital, any hospital providing services to the public can discriminate against LGBT folks versus a private employer discriminating against LGBT folks. I think that's very specific to the state in which that particular entity operates.
I guess I wasn't. No, I understand that. I guess my question to the panel was, do you? I guess I just see a difference between hospitals should not be able to ever do exactly what you did. I see a difference between that and the cake baker who says, "Well, I don't believe in gay marriage, so I'm not going to provide a cake." Do you know what I'm?
Yeah.
Do you understand the question?
Yeah. So the Florida answer is that the case is working its way through the federal courts in Florida. The ACLU has a case down there, but it's not past the motion stage. So I think the issue, we feel sorry for the little guy that like has a little business, or maybe little guys with their own little businesses, and we wouldn't want somebody to come along and tell us to do something that we truly believe is wrong. We're not making it up. We're not trying to make a point. We just believe it's wrong. The problem is we live in a society, and if we allow people to discriminate because their religious beliefs say that's wrong, we will allow little people to discriminate on race. We will allow little people to discriminate against Muslims. We will allow little people to discriminate based on a whole variety of things. Where do we make the line? So we make the line way over here because that works better in society. And we've determined that. That's why we have Human Rights Acts and why we have anti-discrimination laws. And that's why we have the Equal Protection Clause and Due Process Clause in the Constitution, because we decided way over here, or maybe it's way over here on the left, I don't know, way over here, that that's the way our society works. It doesn't work when we allow people to discriminate. It destroys the fabric of America. And so that's why we do it that way. We think the big Catholic employer shouldn't be able to do that, and there's lots of reasons, probably even constitutionally. Catholic institutions like churches get the majority of their money from insurance companies, government insurance, private insurance. They are not self-financing those hospitals. But that argument, we'll see what happens with that argument.
You'd be amazed how many public bonds go into building a Catholic hospital. Any other specific? Yeah, go ahead.
So how do you foresee with marriage equality immigration, right? So for instance, how are we seeing the pipeline to be like in the next few years? Is that going to be positively impacted with the election coming up, or is it going to be negatively kind of?
You mean immigration reform at the federal level?
Like, there's talks about including, a lead to citizenship with your marriage equality, for instance. If there's someone who is undocumented, got married to a United States citizen, how is that going to be recognized in your future?
I'll touch briefly on that. There is some precedent already that, let's say you live in New York and you're married to, or you are going to be married to an immigrant who is here illegal or illegally. It's much harder if you're here without papers. But if you are in a state that recognizes marriage, because the federal government has, under President Obama, has already said all of the agencies that operate under the executive branch, which includes the Department of Homeland Security, you have to recognize what the state says where those people are married with respect to federal laws. So if in New York you are an American citizen marrying a non-American citizen, you have all the rights and benefits as a heterosexual couple, as a homosexual couple. So the short kind of answer to that is we're moving in that direction without an addition to the federal legislation on immigration reform, but it's very piecemeal, and it's state by state right now, not a federal, kind of a federal issue. Bernard, I don't know if you wanted to add anything to the immigration discussion with LGBT folks.
So I do know from our conversations with immigration equality folks that their estimate was that there were 40,000 Americans in binational same-sex relationships. And what they have seen is that in overwhelming majority of those cases where they had applied for the American citizen spouse to to sponsor her or his non-American same-sex spouse, that those have moved without any glitches relating to their marriage, as long as they were married where the marriage was valid when performed. And they haven't seen any glitches, and we had that conversation maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago. So the sense is that that's moving forward as it's supposed to.
You know, on that same issue, I want to ask Em to talk on immigration issues related to the trans community and how, I don't know if you're, versed on this, but there are certainly specific issues that face the trans community, not just with undocumented people who are here, but even people coming from, Europe who have a passport, who are trans. They have an issue kind of coming in and out of the country. Can you touch on those issues?
So I've worked with immigration stuff and I've worked with trans stuff, but I haven't worked a ton with trans immigration stuff. But if you just look at where we are with documentation in general, so if you have immigration papers, if you have any sort of visa paperwork, if you've ever applied for a visa, it's complicated, it's long, it's hard, it's really no fun. But even if you're working on getting correct paperwork in the United States, I'm going to even look at my notes for this, because to change your birth certificate, there's some states you can change your gender marker pretty easily, relatively easily. There's some where you just need, appropriate clinical treatment. Sometimes you just need appropriate clinical treatment. And depending on how you want to transition or where you are in that process, that might mean some hair removal, that might mean seeing a therapist, that might mean a bunch of different things. However, many or most places require the surgery, which is also a very complex question. What really goes into gender confirmation surgery? What does that mean? So if you're talking about your birth certificate, that varies by the state. Social Security Administration is a lot better, more online, more with kind of a federal rights type aspect of it. So I would imagine then, if you're talking about the federal government, you might be able to get a little bit more recognition with appropriate clinical treatment rather than proof of surgery. But I don't specifically know how that might affect visas or attempts at acquiring U.S. citizenship or a green card, unfortunately.
So, and I don't know on the immigration side, but on the traveling side, for America, and actually I wasn't even asking this question, so I'm switching topics now. On the traveling side, American trans folks who are changing their birth certificates or working on changing their papers to reflect their the gender that they present, that my understanding is that has actually improved significantly in the last 6 or 7 years, and the fact that the administration, same issue with the fact that the Department of Homeland Security falls under the executive branch. Now, because they're issuing passports to trans folks that reflect the gender that they present, I think it's easier for...
Passports are appropriate clinical treatment, not surgery.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah, so passports are a lot easier than birth certificates.
Okay, so it is easier for trans folks, trans Americans, to travel, abroad than it was before. Is that correct?
So if you're talking about being able to use your passport correctly, probably. But I also kind of wanted to touch on the difference between the individual level discrimination versus the systemic level discrimination, because you might have a passport that reads you correctly. Like if you're a trans woman, you might have a passport that says your name and says a little F by your gender, but that doesn't stop the TSA agent from passing you off to a male-identified agent for a pat-down. And that doesn't stop a bunch of individual barriers along the way. Or maybe flight attendants not wanting to interact with you. That doesn't stop a bunch of ways that you can be discriminated against and might not have easy ways of recourse for. So I do also want to mention that while oftentimes, I think someone mentioned earlier how the cultural and the legal can interflect and reflect each other, it is a great thing to be able to say that you can change your passport, but that is not necessarily removing a ton of barriers.
Fair enough, or unfair enough, actually.